For those of you who haven't joined us before, my name is Prue Butterworth. I'm one of the product marketing managers here at Kantata and the facilitator for this afternoon's webinar. I'll introduce you to the rest of the team once the number of attendees starts to even up. And in the meantime, probably make some good use of this time to let you know about upcoming events. Those of you who joined us last month will remember that we're now at the midpoint of a webinar series that's looking at best practices, which result in an elevated forecast confidence. Last month, we looked at the role played by analytics and data-informed insights. Today, we're looking at the practice and discipline around operational close. And next month's is a look at how to unlock scale and competitive advantage with what the speaker calls a windshield view. I really like that analogy. And the speaker, Kevin Oaks, from one of our long-standing customers, Esri, has got a lot more of those up his sleeve. Right, so the rest of the team today. The host for today is my partner on the product side, Noelle Desiree, and really excited to hear from our customer, West Monroe, and their Kantata admin, who's called Laura Turner. I will not preempt any of the lovely things that they're going to talk about and just immediately hand over to Laura. Laura, if you can introduce yourself and let the audience know a little about what West Monroe do.
Yeah, thanks, Prue. Hi, everyone. My name's Laura. I am the Senior Kantata Administrator at West Monroe. I've been with West Monroe for about 4 years. West Monroe is a business and technology consulting firm, working with clients across multiple industries and services through roughly 10 practices at our company. And then if you want to just go to the next slide, it shows our offices here. We're about 2,000 people, largely based out of Chicago, with multiple other offices scattered across the US. And we also have a newer office in the UK as well.
Thank you, Laura, for the overview and for joining us today. So excited to have this conversation with you. To get us kicked off on today's topic, why don't you share with us a bit about what the concept of forecasting means at West Monroe?
Yeah, happy to. So at West Monroe, we need to have a reliable long-range forecast for our business operations. Kantata helps us by driving revenue projections for our finance teams. It makes us aware when we have hiring and staffing needs, and it helps to identify what our spending and budgets look like. Like any services firm right now, we're under more pressure with tighter margins than ever.
Thanks, Laura. How vital would you say forecasting to business operations is at West Monroe? And can you tell us a bit about who owns that process?
Yeah, sure. As you guys can imagine, very vital. Our forecasts are really transparent across our business. Those kinds of metrics are discussed at all of our quarterly meetings, monthly meetings, including like planning versus how we're performing against plan. Technically, the forecasts and reporting are owned by our finance team, but our data that they're using is pulled from Kantata. Finance also uses our like house-built next-gen reporting tools, and we also have an integration with Workday, but Kantata is the main source of that data when it comes to revenue forecasting.
Yeah. Every time I talk to you and with West Monroe, one of the things that always impresses me so much is that level of transparency across the business. I think there's like a true level of accountability when it comes to like upholding the processes. I don't get into that too much because you're going to talk about it later. But I think like you were saying, so, all of the processes and work that go into Kantata will ultimately result in that forecasting and reporting that your finance team is then in control of and really has ownership over. Can you tell us within that how complex is the forecasting process at West Monroe?
Yeah, it's definitely complex. We have a lot of consistency though when it comes to our revenue recognition, our forecasting, our project structure. 90%-ish of our projects are fixed price, and at West Monroe, we actually use notional revenue recognition. We mainly work in USD, but like I mentioned, we have a somewhat new UK office. So we've somewhat recently introduced multi-currency for our UK business unit. So we do have some projects that are also operating in pounds.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting too is that even that there is that level of consistency with like the setup of your projects, most projects being in USD, number one, just like the size of your org and the scope of kind of the number of resources that are working across the system add to just like a high amount of data. And then with you guys, it is a bit more unique that you are using notional revenue. So that does add a bit of a layer of complexity. Could you just briefly elaborate on what notional revenue means, maybe for anyone that's unfamiliar?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, most of our projects are fixed price, but we still do assign a notional revenue rate to resources that are working on the projects. So our revenue is recognized when a resource timesheet is submitted and approved. So it's really important to us that time entry is completed in a timely manner. We recognize that revenue based on the notional rate as if it was a time and expenses model, but we still generate those invoices based on a fixed price milestone billing schedule.
Nice, thank you. And I think just to add to that, so typically where you'd see a fixed fee model, so notional revenue isn't as common, but it is a configurable option in Kantata that's available if needed. But I think regardless of the revenue model that you're using, the key takeaway for West Monroe and just for anyone listening in is that Kantata is going to split out the generation, recognition, and billing models in order to support more complicated commercial models for projects like West Monroe are doing. With that being said, let's get more into West Monroe's operational processes. So Laura, first off, can you tell us a bit just about your role and how your team interacts with Kantata on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, I'm the senior Kantata admin on the team. And so I basically help to own the system as a whole and make sure that everything functions properly so that our operational deadlines can be met system-wide. Our team runs both the weekly and monthly close processes. And then the operational close, it happens in Kantata, but it's that operational close process that essentially locks in the revenue values. And then everything's handed over to finance for like their financial monthly close process.
Thank you. Now, when we're discussing operational close, can you tell us more what that looks like at the weekly level specifically? So, like, what is the actual process that you and your team are following? Like, what are the actions that are being taken, not only in Kantata as a system, but just across the organization?
Yeah, so it's kind of surprising to people sometimes, but we've adopted a super strict schedule for period close. And at this point, we really do have it down to a science. So every Monday, we close the prior week, starting at 11 a.m. Central. And firm-wide, everybody's aware of this 11 a.m. deadline. We have some scheduled notifications that go out to resources in support of this to remind them to get their weekly timesheet submitted ahead of the deadline. We have the first one configured for Friday afternoon, and then the second reminder sent out like first thing Monday morning, like before business hours, if they haven't submitted their full like 40-hour work week. And then going back to that notional revenue recognition model, we recognize revenue as time is actualized to a project. So when those timesheets are submitted and approved. So speed of submission and approval are super important for us to close out our weeks really quick.
Yeah. And I think within that and everything that you're saying and just kind of being able to observe how West Monroe work, it really is so key to have that defined schedule when it comes to period close. So the fact that your business knows that there is a deadline and it's down to the hour, I'm sure that's, helping out with consistency when it comes to time entry. I guess, how are you and your team handling any missing timesheets once that weekly deadline begins? So when we're talking, Monday morning at 11 a.m., like what is exactly happening at that point?
Yeah. So we've operated for a long time as a business on the stance of like drawing that hard line in the sand. 11 a.m. is when we start. That's when we lock time entry in the period management dashboard, which is a nice tool that helps us prevent users from submitting any time past that point. We really don't allow for any exceptions once that's started. We do run a few reports on draft and rejected time that are super helpful. Those are for that previous week. And then we upload those exports to a SharePoint folder so they can be referenced as a backup if somebody thinks they submitted their time or they don't know why their time was rejected. So we always have those run before we start to really get into the period close process. And then once our time entry is locked, we start the period close. And we actually do remove any draft and rejected time entries and remaining forecast. It's all deleted. And then the policy that we've adopted at West Monroe, which I actually just had to remind somebody of yesterday during period close, or after period close rather, is that we've adopted the policy that if your time has not been entered by 11 a.m. on the Monday, or like this week, Tuesday, first business day, then you just need to submit the following week. So they had missed some hours from Friday. They would just have, maybe they had submitted 36 hours for last week. They would just include those extra 4 hours in this week's timesheet.
Thanks, Laura. I'm just keeping
I
an
have
eye.
a question for Laura.
I was just gonna say, Prue, I have
Okay.
eye on the chat, so I think these are relevant right now. Question from Sam: how difficult are time adjustments for your org? We try to close weekly as well, but we find that time adjustments can be very tedious if we are strict with weekly closures. Now, if I remember correctly, West Monroe are not doing time adjustments currently, so I don't know if there's anything you can add to that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have anything to add because of how we operate with just the combination of notional revenue. We're not actually invoicing our clients for those actual hours worked. So we have some flexibility there. And then also the fact that we know that there's going to be missed time in weeks and we just expect to see the time made up in subsequent weeks. We actually are in the middle of researching time adjustments, but we don't use them currently.
Thanks, Laura. And there was a question from Chris, which I think you kind of answered as well. So how does notional revenue does notional revenue does notional revenue sort of match overall to the fixed price value?
So generally, we get close, and then we actually use revenue adjustments to, round that number up or down, based on whether we come under budget or if we end up going over budget. And then we include those revenue adjustments in our recognized revenue, but it just gives us like a healthy look on how we, price out projects for billing versus what we're actually, submitting in timesheets and it really drives like the monitoring the value that we give to our clients on pricing out our engagements.
Thanks, Laura. Another question's come in. Are resources expected to have a 40-hour work week?
In our org, largely yes. We do have contractors that aren't working with us full time. We don't send out timesheet reminders to the contractors. And then we also do have some part-time employees. If I remember right, it's probably configurable within the org what your work week looks like or your expected capacity. We also just have our reminders built for a 40-hour work week. So people are expected to bill those 40 hours. And if they don't, then they do get a second reminder Monday morning.
Thanks, Laura. I think we'll pause with questions for now, but please keep them coming in. I'll keep an eye on the chat and we can kind of pause and keep answering. Going back to West Monroe's just weekly close process and some of the points you made previously, I do want to call out how you are all using the lock period functionality. And I think that's exactly as it's intended for. So it is great to see that your team is kind of putting lock periods into effect to help drive those deadlines and org-wide policies. I also love that you have the backups handy. I think that's kind of very smart and wise of you, regardless of how established a process is. There's always going to be those occasional questions will be inevitable. I know you mentioned you got a question this past week, but I guess can you speak to, or do you or your team ever get any pushback on the kind of hard stance and deadline that you've taken?
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, the weekly cadence is so well established at this point that we don't really get that much pushback. We have, random instances like I dealt with yesterday where somebody was just trying to figure out if they could make up that time. But the benefits that we get from the timeliness of our week close really speak for themselves. When we look at that, like the level of accuracy and reliability in our forecasting, that's really all the driving force we need to be able to stick to like that cadence and limit any exceptions. The hard part for us back when was adapting to the concept of a midweek close. For the month end. Prior to using Kantata, we had a homegrown system where I think it was twice monthly submissions. So it was, the adjustment was to get to weekly first, and then the next adjustment was in order to be able to close out our months in a timely fashion. Then we had to do that midweek close. But now it's really second nature for everybody in the company.
Yeah, thank you. And just to add some clarification there in case anyone's not as familiar with what a midweek close means, but essentially that would happen at month end. So say if a month, ends on a Wednesday, for example, in Cantata, that week gets splits into two separate, what we call tracking periods. So essentially the resource would submit a timesheet for Monday through Wednesday, which is the end of the month, and then Thursday and Friday, which is the start of the next month, which happens midweek. But thank you, Laura. Okay, so week close, as Laura shared, really is down to a well-oiled machine at this point. Moving on to your monthly close, can you tell us a bit about what that monthly operational close down process looks like at West Monroe?
For sure. The big difference is for monthly closes that our team does spend a little bit more time prepping for month end. The actual process starts the same because the first thing that we have to do is close out that last weekly period of the month. So like you were saying, if a week ends on a Wednesday, or sorry, a month ends on a Wednesday, we still have to close out the Sunday through Wednesday period. So the same 11 a.m. deadline for timesheets applies, just like it would be, or this is the first business day of the month, regardless of whether it's Monday or not. So from then closing out that last weekly period, we actually do roll right into closing out the month. It's almost just one, big closure process. And prep is super key for us, and does start a few days before the month end. So part of that prep is to make sure that we're in step with our sales team before we push out any project start dates, and we make sure that everything is aligned, accurately aligned with opportunities.
Got it. So what you're saying here is that you're pushing out the opportunity close dates and then pushing forward those project start dates, essentially because the close dates have slipped from the month that you're looking at or currently working to close, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So essentially, when you're moving all the uncommitted revenue from the sales pipeline alongside the committed revenue for any in-flight delivery engagements, you're really able to address both of these forecasts in that single dashboard with period management. So for any items that aren't going to be delivered in that month, you're closing out, you're able to clear out remaining forecasts for the month and really push it all into the next month, right?
Yep. So for example, we do a review of open opportunities within that dashboard, open opportunities with services forecasted for that month. We do a check for change orders to make sure that they're all, in sync with the opportunities, and then we push those dates out as needed for any open opportunities. So ops that haven't been closed won yet. And it's a really good chance for like a pipeline health check and just for maintenance work. So wherever necessary, we will delete any empty proposals. So if they don't have any cost or revenue forecasted, because we won't be able to close the month with any open proposals dated in that month. We're literally getting ready to go through this process right now. We make sure that all of our change orders have been entered correctly and that they're linked correctly to the right opportunities on the Salesforce side. And then we also pull in, where necessary, we also pull in our business development resources or project managers to confirm all that data and the dates, if we have to push anything out.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to pause here because there's some relevant questions that have come up. When closing periods and deleting unused forecast time, do you liaise with the engagement owners to understand the appropriate treatment? So deferring to a later date, for example, or do you simply delete without consultation, and how is that received?
So we, like I mentioned, we're a business of about 2,000 people. So it's not really scalable to reach out, but they are all familiar with how this process goes. There's the operational management tab on the engagement dashboard. That's super helpful for them to see, what hours have been submitted. And largely people just know how this process goes. And if they miss their time, then they're working with the project manager to have that forecast re-updated so that they can submit. And project managers, we have a number of reports on the engagement dashboard as well that will show, weekly activity, weekly hours and revenue. So they always have like a good grasp on the status of those time entries in the engagement. And if some time is missed, they know the process to get that forecast added so that the person can submit the missed hours in the next week.
Thanks, Laura. Another question, does expense, so cost and recovery from client, become part of your monthly close?
So we actually use SAP Concur for expenses. So we have that integrated with Kimball. Oh, sorry, Kantata. That was my first slip up, you guys. I'm sorry.
No worries. You're great.
So we have that integrated, and we have the expense approvals done on the Concur side. So once they sync over to the Kantata side, there aren't any approvals necessary. They just flow right over into the engagement and everything's automatically approved. So they don't necessarily impact anything with period close for our org.
Thanks, Laura. Another question around auto completion of open milestones. So does autocomplete of the open milestone mean through some automated process or code, or does that just mean that whomever is doing the period close just goes ahead and completes the milestones manually? I think I can take this one. So within Kantata, we do have functionality that allows for basically there's a scheduled job that runs that would go ahead and automatically mark milestones as complete based on their forecasted date. So for West Monroe, and Laura, please add to this, you guys are using that scheduled process, but I think you're also looking at some Salesforce functionality to kind of aid to that and make sure it kind of better suits the collaboration across teams. So a bit of both kind of Salesforce config as well as Kantata, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of the nice thing, like one of the big nice things about Kantata in general is that there are so many good out of the box features and options, but then you also do have the ability to do, some customization as well. So yeah, we do currently have that autocomplete job on. Super, super easy to configure if anybody's interested in doing it. It really is just easy to add to the scheduled operations dashboard, and it completes the milestone on the milestone date with the ability to still revert if you need. But we are looking into some customization to instead push the date out to the first of the month while leaving it as draft. Researching that on the side.
Thanks, Laura. While we're on the topic of milestones, there was a question that came in. How do milestones feature in invoicing based on notional revenue?
So the notional revenue, the way that we recognize revenue is solely based on time entries. So we still do assign, we have, rate cards for our rack rates. We generally do assign a discounted revenue rate to each activity assignment. And then if I have a rate, a rack rate of $200 an hour, but I'm assigned at 175, then that's my discount right there, is that $25. And then when I submit time, all of my time is recognized at $175 an hour. So that's how we recognize our revenue. And when we are invoicing, then at the end of the engagement, we're simply comparing what we've invoiced for against what we've generated, and then we do process a revenue adjustment to make those numbers reconcile at the end of the engagement. So the invoices and the milestones don't really have anything to do with the notional revenue. We are literally looking just at time entries as though it was a time and expenses project, and we're invoicing everything down to the hour, and that's what we recognize. While it's still not actually, like, we're still actually invoicing milestones. It was a new concept for me when I started at this company. It seems strange, but I know that it's not widely used.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Another question has come in. So for weekly period closure, do you use any scheduled operations or manually clear the entire period?
So I don't have any jobs configured. I don't think, off the top of my head, I don't think we have any scheduled jobs configured that help with this, but the period close, the period management dashboard, when you clear out the forecast, there are, resource and unresourced. Resource meaning it's assigned to a person, unresourced meaning it's assigned to generic resources. And then there are also like active and inactive, like categorizations on the period management dashboard. And each of those like subcategorizations has ways, basically, and it's super simple, but I will just open a tab for each. And then there's a way to remove, and it kicks off a job within the period management dashboard that will just go through and remove the forecast. The only thing that's a little bit manual is removing the draft and rejected time, because we go into each person's timesheet. We don't have that many of those a week, but it does give us the ability to audit. We have, I think this probably will come up later too, but we have like a way to auto submit PTO. So we know that if maybe a job failed that didn't submit PTO for somebody, we have the chance to kind of audit that and then submit for them. But off the top of my head, I don't know that we have any scheduled operations jobs configured that help us.
Yeah, it has, I think when we've looked at your process before, that hasn't come up. So I will second that. Okay, so bit of a detour going through the questions. I think circling back to talking about your monthly close, and kind of understanding your process, which quite honestly, I feel like you guys have kind of set it up to be a bit of an ideal situation. You're maintaining your forecast, you're also driving alignment across different departments, which is so key. And I think that's kind of the beauty of period management, is that, even though the operations team may own the actual, actions that are being taken within these dashboards, it really is the contribution across, many different departments. With all of that being said, I guess, like, is there a practical reality here? Like, are you having to do any corrections or any chasing that's really having to happen for your team as you're going through the period management process?
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely the occasional corrections that need to be made. And part of why we give ourselves a few days to prep for month end corrections, chasing down like opportunity and project dates and other info, and reforecasting, that's always somewhat inevitable. But overall, we just experience so much less overhead now than in the past based on all the processes that we've established at West Monroe. And the automation options that we've enabled also help make everything just more streamlined. And it's part of why we're able to consistently close out our month in Kantata in a single day.
Thanks, Laura. And as I keep saying, having been able to work closely with West Monroe and just learning about the processes you've put in place operationally, it just really is so impressive to see the consistency with which you're meeting that operational close down and that single day deadline month after month. Obviously the operations team at West Monroe are just amazing. And they're the ones that are actually completing, the period management actions and taking, removing those items from the screen and everything. But again, as I kind of keep mentioning, it really is a team effort and requires lots of discipline with everyone across the service org playing a part, I think is important to get across.
Yeah, it's definitely managed at all levels. Our consultants are responsible for submitting their timesheets for the projects they're working on. They're responsible for submitting that on time. Our project managers are accountable for, making sure that the resources are entering their time, and that the project forecasts are up to date. Our resource managers are looking into that forecast to understand, upcoming staffing demands for both active projects and work that's in the pipeline. And then our operations team is ultimately responsible for, ensuring that the pending items forecasted in the period are reconciled and reforecasted. And then all of this contributes to, the financial reporting, and the data from Kantata supports the financial close down process. Like the true financial reporting for our finance team happens post close, but everything comes from Kimball, and their process starts when we're able to hit that close button on the previous period.
Thanks, Laura. And I do have to pause just to read a comment from Chris. For a company your size, well done. Period closure is the most difficult area to complete by deadlines, and you seem to have done it. Kudos to Laura and West Monroe, because I second Chris's comment. Another question is with regards to above, we have flows, options, and Salesforce. So I think this is referring back to the flows that you're putting in around milestones. So do you think creating auto trigger flows will help us to delete the draft timesheet and usage from period management screen? Have you come across any clients who are using this? In my experience, no, I have not. Laura, I don't know if that's something you've explored, but maybe something we could follow.
Yeah, we haven't explored that. I think just because for us deleting the draft timesheets, it's not super time consuming. It's a little bit manual compared to the rest of the process, but I would say that in a general week close, we maybe have like 12 people that have draft time. So it's really not a lot in a company of 2,000. It doesn't really seem believable that the number would be that low. But again, it goes back to, having established these processes and these timelines for so long, that everybody's just kind of on board and used to the way that we have everything working.
Thanks, Laura. Question from Sam that's come in. So just going back to the time reentry requirements for resources that miss those timesheet deadlines, do you have any sort of extra comp policy as it relates to 40 plus billable hours weekly? I assume this process creates many weeks that would appear as though resources working more than 40 hours in a single week, but this might not actually be the case.
That's a great question. We don't generally have like any overtime policies for consultants. We do have some overtime policies for some internal folks that are at lower levels, but we actually do use, unfortunately for them, they have to enter time in two places. We use Workday for their, because that's our payroll system now, so they enter time there as well to get paid out for overtime. So luckily, no conflicts with overtime pay and that extra time getting submitted in the next period. It's a good question, though.
Thanks, Laura. All right, so now that we've talked through weekly and monthly close, let's dive into some of maybe the strategies and lessons learned. So really in detailing all of your processes so far, we've talked about current state for West Monroe. I think touching on those lessons learned and how West Monroe's operational process has evolved to get to where you're at today, or just any specific capabilities that maybe you couldn't live without that are driving efficiencies for your team. Anything you can speak to on that, Laura?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say first and foremost, it has been an iterative process. We have gone, it wasn't built in a day, and it takes a lot of cooperation across a lot of teams and stakeholders. But that being said, anywhere we've had the opportunity to leverage Kantata functionality to automate our process has been a game changer in driving efficiency and helping us to meet our weekly and monthly deadlines. So we actually use automated timesheet approvals, and that saved us, countless hours every week across hundreds of active engagements in Kantata. We also, like I kind of mentioned before, and actually I guess I misspoke with the scheduled ops, because this actually does pull into scheduled operations, but we have our PTO activities configured to auto actualize. And that is by using a specific field on the other activity itself, and then setting up the job in the scheduled operations dashboard to run over the weekend and submit. So that means that we're not having to chase down our resources to submit PTO while they're out of the office. And previously we were cross-validating all of this with like a manual report, where we would have to do a line by line review of every single resource with forecasted PTO. It sounds ridiculous right now thinking about back like to that, but to make sure that like if they that to make sure that their time submitted, so that impacts our capacity calculations. So it's really important that PTO is submitted, obviously. It impacts the capacity reporting and revenue expectations. So now we have a lot of manual effort spared there by the auto actualization of PTO.
Yeah.
And then, like I said before, too, the being able to lock time entry is another one that helps just a little bit, because it just prevents new items from coming in while we're in the middle of completing period close activities.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. And I think most people can relate to at some point kind of going the manual spreadsheet route. So we love to see, any manual efforts being saved, and especially where you've been able to do this so consistently. It's great. Um, Obviously, for West Monroe, there is a lot of data to deal with here. So is Kantata helping you surface where the problems are and what records need to be actioned?
Yes, definitely. Like I mentioned just a minute ago, we have hundreds of active engagements, at any time. And over a company of 2,000 people that are submitting time to those projects. So the period management gives us just one single dashboard where everything is displayed and where data is reconciled in one place. And it allows us to close the weekly and monthly periods, and it aligns our forecast with what actually has happened in a project. So it makes it easier for our project managers, for our finance team, for our client success team. Everybody, once that period is locked, then everybody has visibility into where the project has landed up to that specific date of the previous week's close.
Nice. I love all the questions that are coming in, so I'm going to pause again. How do you ensure resources forecast is standard 40 hours per week and not excess to ensure accurate capacity planning?
I think that there are definitely times where it's going to be over that. In consulting, I'm sure just a lot of people can relate to that, whether you guys are consultants or admins in your orgs. And it just depends. It varies per project. Kind of stepping off into the engagement management piece, we have different usage behaviors that we use across our engagements. And if we want somebody 100% allocated to an engagement, we'll use that usage behavior that auto calculates the remaining hours. It's utilization between two dates is what we have it called. I don't know if that's the stand. I think it must be the standard name in Kantata for it. But other than that, it's just solely based off of that, that usage behavior. And then we also heavily rely on like utilization reporting. We have reports built out that show us, capacity hours. So if they're on PTO a day, their capacity would be 32. If they're not, then it's a full 40. And then their forecast hours. And then we'll identify, weird looking numbers, why somebody might have 152 hours forecasted in a week, or if somebody, needs some more work to do, or if their assignment has become too much and we need to bring some more people into the engagement. That reporting really helps with that as well.
Thanks, Laura. I think this next question is actually a really good segue into the next slide, but has your rigor around period close had a positive impact on project margins? So for example, consultants having a degree of accountability on time spent, submitted, and so on, plus sheer visibility to their time actuals.
Yeah, I think it definitely does. People that join the company, I think are usually surprised to hear the timeline that they have to submit, every week, and that we do close the periods on such a strict schedule. But largely everybody's just used to it. And because of that, I think we have, really accurate submissions, on-time submissions, accurate submissions, and accurate visibility, or visibility into accurate metrics in the engagements. Whether it's we do discount metric reporting, margin, obviously anything that's cost and revenue related is really important.
Laura. And I cannot thank you enough for sharing all of this detail. I'm amazed that we got through all of these questions so far. Before we wrap up here and kind of, I guess, getting to our final thoughts here, any last insights you can share for anyone in the audience who maybe is considering Kantata's period management feature set or are looking to revamp their operational close processes?
Oh my gosh, yeah. So the biggest thing I think, I suggest committing to a process, getting your process established and adhering to a schedule. Once you get people on board with that part, it's a lot less painful for them once they're just used to the process and the schedule. And then figure out what automation options might work for your business model. And implement them. So like I mentioned before, we have a lot of Kantata out of the box features that we've used, but we also do constantly explore custom configuration in Salesforce, which is super nice. Get ahead of month end where possible, do prep, look at the data for month end, look at those proposals, look at those milestones ahead of time, and fix what you can before the day of. And then just remember that forecasting accuracy drives a lot of what you'll see in the system. So it's definitely worth the effort of establishing that operational process and schedule.
Thanks, Laura. Always love having you on and just hearing more about everything that you and the team are doing at West Monroe. I guess we'll pause here for questions. If anybody has any more to add, feel free to add them to the chat. Before we kind of get into our next steps. You'll see on your screen that there is a poll. So as I'm kind of going through these final items, feel free to select your answers as they're relevant to you. But I guess first up, I wanted to share information on our financial close e-learning course. So this is available for all customers who are wanting to learn more about the topics we addressed today. This course takes about 2 hours to complete. I really cannot recommend it enough. Again, it's included for all customers and will cover the ins and outs of period management, gets into details of troubleshooting, as well as best practices. So if this is something you're interested in, you can go ahead and contact your CSM to get access. And then we also would like to share today that we have a service offering called Period Management Health Check. So this would apply to customers who have gone through the financial close course that I just mentioned and are still needing further support. So perhaps you have many open periods and you want to start closing them out, but need some help getting started or even just establishing a process and a period close cadence for your org. So again, if this is something you're interested in, please contact your CSM who can share more details. Let's see if we don't have any more questions. That brings us to the end of our webinar today. So thank you again to everyone who's joined us, especially for Laura for helping us, host the session today and sharing all of your insights. Again, please take some time to answer the poll questions if you can. That feedback is so useful for our team to just ensure the content we're putting out there is actually useful. Prue, if you don't have anything else, I think that is all we had today. So thank you all again and hope to see you next time.